shot full of nose. It's D&D. D&D Beyond. Yeah, D&D. D&D Beyond. You got your stats, you got your swords, and you got your invisible wall. It's D&D. D&D Beyond.
Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of And Beyond. I am Adam Bradford, the product director for D&D Beyond, and I'm joined by Todd Kenrick.
That's me. I am
I
Todd
stole
Kenrick, the
your
creative
thunder a little
director
bit
at D&D Beyond.
It's great to have everyone. We've got a couple of quick announcements that we wanted to share with folks today before we get in with our very special guest. But first of all, if you are watching the Twitch stream, I've got it on my screen over here, you can actually take a look at an early build of our D&D Beyond Twitch extension going right now. Now, these characters are characters in a campaign that we play here in the office, so pay no attention. Who knows? People might be watching right now. They might be adjusting hit points. They might be adding conditions, all kinds of things happening with the characters, but pay no attention to the specifics of the characters themselves, but you can see how the extension is going to work. We've got some announcements coming up pretty soon about that. People are going to start being able to get it in their hands. So take a look at that, play around with it a little bit while the stream's going on today. If you need some idle movement, you can play with the Twitch extension. And then secondly, we also released the creatures section on the digital character sheet today. So yeah, this is really exciting. We have had so many requests for being able to reference monster statistics on the fly, right in your character sheet at the table. We released that today. Go check that out. Give us your feedback. We're always listening to feedback, but we're really excited that we're able to support that at this point in time. And if you have a pet, Frumpkin for Liam on Critical Role, he can track all the different forms that Frumpkin takes now. So it's a really, really handy section on the character sheet. Check that out today. Let us know what you think. Anything else we need to talk about, Todd?
A lot of happy wizards and necromancers and druids out there today.
Yeah. Right. Did you do know that that's my nickname with my wife, right? Necromancer.
Necromancer?
Yeah, like neck romancer. Anyway, all right. We'll move on.
What is happening?
I just okay. We'll move on. We've got an incredibly special guest today with us, the sage himself, Mr. Jeremy Crawford. So there is Jeremy. So I let you in very well.
I know. It's like how can I follow that? Now I'm just going to be thinking of the neck romancer the entire time.
That's exactly right.
Oh,
thank you for sabotaging this stream, Adam.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. I needed to just make sure that we lightened the mood a bit before the sage came on and spoiled everybody's fun by telling everyone that they can't do this or they can't do that. No, I'm just playing. So let's start there, Jeremy. I am curious as to why you are kind of called the sage at this point. Can you get into the history of how that title of the sage and sage advice and all, how did all of that start?
So Sage Advice has been something in D&D going all the way back to first edition in Dragon Magazine. And there have been many different people who've worn the mantle of the Sage. And we decided when we were leading up to the release of 5th edition that we wanted to officially bring back sort of this title of the Sage and Sage Advice. And it made sense to us that that person would be me because I am the game's lead rules designer. And basically, who better to tell people what the rules mean than the person who oversaw their creation?
Right.
Because in the past, we've often had people who might have had some distance from the creation of the rules, and they would have to consult with someone who worked on the game, or they would need to do some research. Whereas I can basically have a conversation with myself once in a while. If there are cobwebs in my memory about why we did something the way we did, I can consult with someone else on the team. But usually it's just I think back and it's like, oh yeah, that's why we did this or that, 5 to 7 years ago when we were designing different aspects of fifth edition. I'm also the game's managing editor, and so really this is the first time in the game's history that Sage, managing editor, and lead rules designer have all fused into one. So it's like I'm a Voltron of some kind.
Nice. I love that reference. How does
Are
so
there
out
are there
of those
particular questions you've been asked the most for sage advice?
Uh, so I get asked questions about everything, and from the really big when it comes to like the philosophy of our game design, why are monsters designed the way they are? Why is the encounter day designed the way it is? What's our class design philosophy? Uh, is D&D all about combat, or does it also support role playing? The questions I get, they
Mhm.
run the gamut. But then I also get super specific questions, questions on how does twin spell work? And twin spell over the life of the edition is one of the things I get asked about more than anything else. I often will get asked questions that are very specific, often based on people's understanding of how things worked in past editions. So often,
Mm,
past editions, if people have played them, will kind of lurk in their consciousness, almost like ghosts of editions past, uh, who
yeah.
will influence their interpretation of the fifth edition rules. We even find that actually in our designers, that sometimes I'll read a draft of something and I'll say, well, this is a really great design 10 years ago, but this is fifth edition. Because there will often be terms and whatnot that really show that the person's still being influenced by third edition or fourth edition, or sometimes even second or first edition. And so fans also have that. Fans also love to ask me fun interaction questions, like how does this little corner case interact with this little corner case? And sometimes they feel like word problems from school. If I
Yeah.
leave the supermarket at 5 o'clock, and get to the train station by 10, uh, will the troll be there? Now, uh,
and
and
and then your
and
response is that's up to your DM and your table.
yes, yes, yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Or there's a
I
chart.
mean,
There might be a chart in the in the guide.
and I am in a fun position. I mean, not only because just my job is a delight, often a ton of work, but it's always hard for me, even when the workload is crazy high. I can't stay grumpy very long because it's like I'm making the rules for Dungeons and Dragons. I'm overseeing the creation of
Yeah.
books for Dungeons and Dragons. So it's kind of hard to, get too upset when sometimes the workload gets really, really heavy. It's a real privilege to get to do it. But when it comes specifically to my role as the sage and the lead rules designer, it's it's funny because at heart I'm a story guy, and all of the decisions I make about our rules are motivated by how are we supporting storytelling at the game table, how well are we providing DMs with the improvisation tools they need to tell a good story, and
Mhm.
and you'll notice I didn't say give all the rules for every situation. It's give the improvisation tools for as many situations as possible, because I want DMs to feel empowered, to feel like they've got just enough tools to wing it and wing it confidently, but not so many rules that they feel crushed by a bunch of stuff they've got to remember, or a bunch of things they're going to feel bad about that they forgot at the end of the session. I'm often in my rules design actually on the hunt for things I refer to as feel bad design. Like if there's an element in a monster where I look at it, and because I DM so much, I'll look at it and I'll say, that's exactly the kind of ability that the average DM is going to forget. Then they'll reread the stat
Mm.
block at the end and just feel bad because they forgot it. And so that's what I mean by feel bad design. And so I'm always looking for ways for us to get that kind of thing out of the game so that DMs feel confident, they feel empowered, players feel like they have the tools they need to realize the type of archetypal fantasy characters they want to play. Uh, and also enough tools to make non-archetypal characters. So D&D is all about big archetypes. It goes all the way back to first edition with the class system. D&D is really strong at realizing a core set of archetypes. And so we always make sure we fully set the table for representing those archetypes, but we also make sure you can go against type with things like multi-classing and feats. Uh, the wrap up of all of that is, even though I give very specific rules answers, uh, even though the game has official rules, at the end of the day, as people on Twitter have often heard me say, it ultimately is about your group having fun, about you feeling empowered, you feeling creative, and you just having a great time at the D&D table as you use this game the way you want to use it.
Very cool.
Outstanding. How does so that role as sage and lead rules designer, how does that differ from the managing editor role? Like, let's talk about what a managing editor actually does on Dungeons and Dragons.
So, as managing editor, I touch every aspect of our books. What that means is I not only make sure that all of the writing gets done for our books, I also have to make sure that our books are edited appropriately, that our editors have the tools they need to do their jobs well. Then, once we get the edited text, I oversee the process where the text is then married to our art. Then I work directly with our art director and our graphic designer in laying out the books. Many people don't realize that every one of our books is bespoke. Often in the final weeks of a book, it's usually Kate Irwin, Emmy Tanji, and myself sitting there and by hand moving pieces of art around, getting the text to break on the page exactly the way we want. My role as managing editor means I was also involved in choosing every font we use in fifth edition. Uh, what talking with Emmy and Kate about different folio treatments on the pages, the splotches that you see around the art.
Now,
Basically,
what
it
is a
means
folio? What
oh,
is a folio
folio on
for
the
everyone?
pages. So when you open up a book, you'll see at the bottom there's usually page numbers, the name of a chapter, uh, that sort of thing. That's called the folio. And you'll notice in many of our books, there's a different little artistic treatment down there that is usually designed by Emi Tanji. In our upcoming Ravnica book, those treatments were designed by Trish Yoakum, our new graphic designer. So now we have two graphic designers.
I was about to
Uh,
say that Trish did an outstanding job because I saw
yes.
this and I was like, man, this might be the best folio that I've seen yet. I really, really like the one in Ravnica.
Yeah, this was Trisha's first book with us, and she did a fantastic job.
That's awesome. Do
So
you
in
have
summary, as managing editor, I touch every aspect of a book,
every all of it? All of it.
all of it.
Okay, that
Yep.
being said that you touch all of D&D, what do you is it hard for you not to play favorites, especially when it comes to certain like subclasses that are in the game? Do you have some that are just at your absolute favorites or were your babies, like whether they were in the player's handbook or Xanathar's?
So and I'm not just saying this. This isn't the parent who, basically tells Johnny that, I love all three of my kids equally, but really Sally is my
When
favorite.
it's not
No,
true, yeah.
right. So so I think of every class and every subclass as my babies, because every official one, especially the ones in the player's handbook and Xanathar's Guide to Everything, I worked on every single one of them in some capacity. My direct involvement varies. Like for instance, uh, in the cleric and the wizard in the player's handbook, a lot of that subclass work, uh, like my hands are directly on that text. Whereas in other cases, I'm sometimes overseeing the work of somebody else and I'll bring the design home. Uh, but even though I had a more direct hand in some classes and subclasses than others, I feel attached to all of them. Part of that is because whenever I do my design work, whether I'm doing the writing myself or I am approving the writing of somebody else, a big part of my assessment of a class or a subclass is putting myself in the shoes of a person who wants that thing. When I'm looking, for instance, at a subclass in the fighter, for me, it's all about what do I now in this moment? I'm a fighter player. What do I want? What's my bliss here? And so, because so much of my design exercise is about trying to empathize with what the player of that thing wants, it means I have this kind of personal connection with each one, this affection for not only this piece of our game, but also for the people who want that thing in the game. And a big part of our philosophy is designing each piece for the person who wants that piece. What I often like to say back when we were designing the player's handbook, I would say to the team about the cleric, for instance, we need to make healers, and specifically the cleric, appeal to people who like to play clerics. We don't need to make it great for the people who don't want to play them. I say this because actually
Oh yeah, yeah.
sometimes not only in D&D but in other games you'll get this weird phenomenon of someone will just decide no one likes to play healers. Therefore we're going to make healers appeal to people who don't like to play healers. Well, first off, we thankfully get enough playtest data. We know tons of people like to play healers. So we're going to make healers appeal to people who like to play healers and instead make things for people who
Yeah.
don't want to play healers, make them enjoy those things. Uh, and it helps that D&D is such an asymmetrical game where the classes don't need to be built exactly alike. Each class can just be good in the ways it needs to be good to fulfill its fantasy. Because each class, in a way, is a little fantasy, and so our job as designers is to make sure the cleric is the best cleric it can be. We don't need to make the cleric a kind of, well, it will also pass as a fighter for a person who wants to play a fighter. No, there's the fighter if you want to play the fighter. There's the ranger if you want to play the ranger. There's the paladin if you want to play the paladin. Uh, so that's our philosophy.
Given
You
that,
did not answer my
what
question though.
What was the question?
I
Do I
was
have a
asking
favorite?
which of those are your favorites, and you're like, no,
Oh.
all of them. They're all my babies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, don't let
Okay.
him off the hook on that.
So what I will say, I will answer the question. So as a designer, I enjoy working on all of them. So that really was my answer to your question. But if you're asking me, Jeremy, as a gamer, because I've also been playing D&D since I was about 6 or 7 years old.
Wow.
I almost always play wizards and clerics. That's my bliss as a player. But that said, it's funny, during especially the 5th edition playtest, there were times where I totally grooved on playing the barbarian, for instance. Like sometimes it's fun to just smash heads. And it's funny, I often like to go to the total opposite end. So typically if I'm going to play a non-spellcaster, rather than sort of going to like a middle setting, like a ranger or a paladin, I want to go all the way to the other end. And usually I'm barbarian, I'm raging, I'm knocking doors down, but usually I'm playing a cleric or a wizard.
Talking about
Very
all
nice.
these classes and your favorite, what are your thoughts on balance between the classes? We've seen a lot of discussion coming up of late. I even saw a Twitter reply, I think, from you today about
It was
kind of how
today.
that works. I think it was, and we're seeing people starting to talk a little bit more about almost like PvP in Dungeons and Dragons, and how does this class stack up against this class? How does that? How do you guys focus on that, and what are your thoughts as the lead designer on balance between the classes themselves?
So the key thing, and I even said this in one of my tweets today, is D&D is a co-op game. And so when you're assessing the classes, you're basically getting off to the wrong start if you're putting classes into these sort of like PvP mashups and seeing who's the more powerful, because that's not how we design the game. We design the classes to work together to together face various challenges presented to them by the dungeon master. Uh, Outside of that context, the wheels are going to start to come off. Like if you lock, just take 2 random classes into an arena, I cannot guarantee you that we have balanced each class to go up against each other, in some one-on-one death match. Now, they are going to feel balanced ish, because we do have some common math that undergirds every class when it comes to their damage output, their resilience, the healing, or other defensive capabilities they might have. So they are all within spitting distance of each other, but they are not sort of equivalent when it comes to damage output. For instance, if we just, it's not like every class deals the same amount of damage at every level and it's just the damage types are different. No, that's not how we design the game. We have actually designed the game so that certain classes do deal more damage than other classes on average. Other classes are compensated by dealing for the fact that they're dealing less damage because they're often more resilient, they're often more versatile. There are certain classes that have basically a kit of tools that maybe those high damage classes are lacking. And where those other classes shine is, hey, I've got the trick for this. When it comes to the trap, the locked door, the stubborn courtier who needs to be persuaded in some way, because D&D isn't all about combat. And so when I talk about asymmetrical design and asymmetrical balance, we balance the classes so that the way we think about it is they are equally effective at contributing over the course of an entire campaign. So there are always going to be particular moments in time. If you take a snapshot in time in a D&D campaign, where a particular character is going to outshine the other characters. That's also partly by design, because this is a storytelling game, and it's nice to have some stars occasionally in different scenes. Our goal
Yeah.
is that in our design, everyone gets to be a star at some point. Even think of a recent ensemble cast, huge ensemble cast film, like the latest Avengers film, where we had
Right.
a bajillion characters, but in each scene you have stars. You have somebody
Mhm.
who excels in a way that the other characters do not. That's how D&D is designed. So anytime people sort of start barking up the tree of, this game is broken because it's obvious the rogue is dealing more damage than the wizard on
Right.
average. Well, first off, that difference is intentional. And in fact, on average, the rogue does deal more damage than the wizard, and the fighter on average deals more damage than both of them. Uh, Again, it's about the team, it's about cooperation, it's about the team's effectiveness. That's why I often like to urge people to think not about their character's power, think about your party's power. Because the
Yeah.
most effective parties are the people who synergize together, who uh, who share their strengths and compensate for each other's weaknesses. One of the most classic examples of this that goes all the way back to basic D&D is often the pairing of the fighter and the wizard, where you have the wizard who is classically physically brittle. And way back in the earliest days of the game, often you could just like half breathe on the wizard and the wizard would fall over
Yeah.
dead.
Like a hard
And
rain.
yeah, and that the fighter was often there not only to dish out some saucy damage, but also to protect his or her friend. And
Mhm.
those bonds, that friendship, that guarding each other, that's fundamental to the D&D experience. D&D at its heart is not a PvP game. And so always for me, the way to think about this is you're a team. And how are you looking out for each other? How are you building each other up? How are you also sharing the spotlight? Uh, it does happen sometimes that because of the adventure a DM has created, that a particular class might end up with a larger number of spotlight opportunities than normal. When that happens, I love to encourage players to try to be sensitive to the fact that it's happening and whenever possible share that spotlight. Look for
Mhm.
opportunities to make your friends look great. Like, hey wizard, yeah, it is fabulous to cast fireball after fireball after fireball. But if you notice that your DM is putting a bunch of monsters up against the group that all have immunity to non magical damage, and the DM has forgotten to give the fighter a magic weapon, hey, wizard, why don't you cool it for a second and cast magic weapon on your buddy's sword so that your buddy also
Yeah.
gets a chance to shine. And that to me is not
Uh-oh. Did we lose him? Did we lose Todd also? Can you hear me, Todd? Can you hear me, Todd? Okay, so chat can hear me. So I'm going to just have a chat with the chat real quick. All right. Todd, can you hear me still?
I can hear you totally fine.
Okay, here we go.
Listen,
We
I just
have
needed a break. I
lost.
needed to. I just needed a.
Oh.
That was a hold person spell. Everybody,
Jeremy, are
everything's
you
fine.
back? Yeah.
I'm
Somebody
back.
twinned it or tripled it.
Nice.
Well,
So
I
whole
am
person has released.
I am secretly a mind flayer, and I accidentally broadcast a psychic blast. And sorry about that.
Yeah,
Obviously.
sorry. Yeah. Your information is paralyzing.
Where were we even? I have no idea where we were now.
Oh, I was just talking about teamwork, and here we
Oh
are.
yes, teamwork.
Yeah.
Do you have
Yes.
anything
Yep.
that you want to put a pin in about that? Because it was eloquent and beautiful before you mind blasted everyone.
Yeah.
I was so working myself into a tizzy, my psychic powers just burst. So, just in summary, the game is designed for the different character classes to support each other, to make each other better. And you see this all over the place with the fighter able to protect their friends, with the cleric healing and blessing others, with the wizard being able to solve problems for the group, but also to make other party members stronger with different buffs and protective spells. If you go through every class, you'll see there are ways for everyone to make everyone else better.
Yeah, like casting enlarge on the orc. Orc barbarian.
Yes. Yes.
Just going
Yeah.
like Hulk
Yeah.
smash.
Uh-huh.
like
Yeah.
that's what I like about the about being a sorcerer, about being a wizard, is like being able to buff your friends and give them that moment that is absurd
Yeah.
and crazy. And kind of
Yeah.
elevating everybody else. And yeah, that's a great example. Also, like, if you don't have that moment, if you're playing a game, I think you can find your moment by role playing, because
Mhm.
like Drax doesn't do much in Infinity War, right? But he's like, this isn't a man. This isn't a dude.
like a
this is a man. Like
pirate
an
had a baby
angel.
with an angel.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
He like
Yeah.
I love
stole
that
that
moment
movie.
Yes, where his moment where it's clear that just for a moment there he had a hardcore crush on Thor.
Yeah. Oh, not for a
He's just
moment.
sort of like
I don't know if that was
Yeah.
a crush. Head over heels. So
yeah.
Jeremy, you mentioned earlier that so typically on this show, we talk about some things that are not completely, maybe directly related to Dungeons and Dragons, but then we kind of talk about how these things, other things that we do, because there are other things in life. I mean, outside of Dungeons and Dragons, a few things anyway.
Outside my life.
And how those things come back and impact Dungeons and Dragons, our D&D experience. Why is it that you gravitate toward clerics and wizards, do you think? And I'm leading a little bit here, but
I know
I
you
don't
are.
know I don't know what the actual honest answer
I can
is.
tell you're leading because you're leaning.
I might be. Oh, I gotta lean
That's
this
your
way. I
tell,
get mixed up.
physically.
Yeah, that's-
Yeah. So, I mean, first off, I I have always, when it comes to wizards, going back to when I was a really little kid, I've always loved stories about wizards and witches, uh, Partly because it's sort of the nerdy thing of knowledge being power. I've always loved to read,
Yeah.
this idea that the more you know, the more empowered you can feel. And the wizard really realizes that fantasy because the wizard is all about, I studied these books and now can do these amazing things. So that to this day, that resonates with me. When it comes to the cleric, I love the idea of playing a character who is deeply connected to the cosmos and specifically to a deity who represents some of the powers of that cosmos, which also speaks to. In my own past, some people watching, and actually many of the people watching might not know that when I was a young man, I went to seminary, have my master's degree in theology, so even in real life, that that also is a thing for me. And also the two in seminary, the two merge together, where so much of it is about the studying of ancient texts, and and then determining what you do with that knowledge. Because just like in the game world, where magic can be used for good or for ill, in our world, knowledge, and specifically religious knowledge, can be used for good or for ill.
So essentially, you're saying you're a real life mystic theurge, where it's like you got these
Yeah,
like
yeah.
arcane spells, divine spells. When are we going to
Yep.
see that for fifth edition? No, I'm just joking. We won't put you on that spot. But yeah. So you have your seminary trained. I actually
Hmm.
have a degree in religion, so that's nothing directly related to what I do now. Of course, like that's how college went for a lot of people, right? But yeah, so this degree in religion, and I happen to know that one of your hobbies right now is a little bit of digging into these ancient texts. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So I am as bookish in my hobbies as I am in my work, because, as you know, one of my hobbies is reading the New Testament, in particular in the original Koine Greek, and doing translations. This was something I started to do when I was in seminary, and I do it to this day. I've often dreamt that when I retire, that one of the things I will do is a full translation. Many other people have done this, so the world doesn't need the translation by Jeremy Crawford, but it 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 is a fascinating thing to do nonetheless, because I believe so strongly in every area of study, whether it's something serious for one's work or for one's entertainment, in empowering oneself by engaging with the texts oneself. I mean, this was something my teachers early on did such a great job of teaching me, that why listen to someone else telling you about this thing when you can read it yourself, encounter it yourself, come to a conclusion yourself. And so when it comes to studying religious texts, which for many people are like foundational for their lives, the older I get, the less patience I have with reading other people's translations of them, because usually then you're reading something through someone else's interpretive lens. And so, in the spirit of encountering something as directly as possible, I'm often going to the original, and using my meager translation skills to grapple with the original as best as I can. It's funny, this is a principle that people will see me exercising even when I give rules answers, because so often I'm saying, check out the player's handbook, go to the text. I get asked sometimes if those answers are given maybe in impatience or whatnot. But no, for me, it's actually a very serious and sometimes joyful thing to go directly to a text, read the thing yourself, and then you know for sure. Then you don't have the question mark of, "Oh, I'm relying on what someone else told me." It's like, no, I found it myself. I now have the tools myself. And that's a really powerful feeling, which you can have that feeling with, again, your recreation like D&D, but you can also have that feeling in other areas of life, whether you're studying up on maybe a health condition you have, or your
Yeah.
faith, or politics. There's so much power in digging in grapple with that text, come to your own conclusions, talk about it with someone else, go back to the text and see if now your perspective of the text has changed because you did talk to other people. But again, I always like tell people go back, because we change. There are some texts I translated years ago, and now I've come back to them and translate them differently now. Which is, it's funny. When I was younger, I would often get very, very upset when I would read translations and I would translate it myself, and I'd say, "Oh God, this is so wrong." I still occasionally get cranky when I see translation that I think is off the mark. But the older I get, the more sort of merciful I feel, because even when I look at myself, it's like I have changed and my perspectives have changed. And, it's basically we can't ever get the subjective viewer out of the equation. And we like to imagine text is objective, uh, but again, you can't ever get the reader out of the equation. And we as readers are moving targets. And the the feelings we bring, the knowledge we bring, the experience we bring to texts we read, that's changing constantly, which is why I love returning to texts over and over again, just to see what new treasures are there that I now find because I'm in a different place in my life.
I this is a weird follow up to that. but
Oh, here we go.
being that you are in charge of so much of the text of D&D.
Uh huh.
What is your homebrew game like? Like what? Because you and I have talked quite a bit about like how we run
Hmm.
our games a little bit differently than what you might consider vanilla D&D, and you and I have we're very like minded about certain things like goblins and other creatures. Like what are some of your house rules for your game, and in what ways are some of your settings unique to you?
Oh, he's got to be careful. If he talks about a house rule, like people are going to think that that's the way it should be
Yeah,
played. Here
yeah,
we
I
go.
know, I
So
I'm
know.
looking
See,
forward to this.
yeah.
so here's the thing. One of the advantages of my job is the game is my house rules. So I I do not have a single house rule in my home game. Uh,
Oh,
I
really? You ever just like held up the book and said like, "I wrote the book on this"? Just for
No. So here's the thing. Uh, any of my players can back me up on this, and my players include Chris Perkins, James Wyatt, and others. Rules almost never come up in my home game because I am such a story-focused DM. Uh, who, by the way, because remember, my job is the rules of the game. The last thing I
Mhm.
want to do in my free time is more rules for the game.
Right,
Uh,
right, right.
and so I of course will make on the fly calls about the rules uh, that might go against what's in the book. So it's like a kind of a momentary house rule, but I don't write it down. It doesn't become an established thing. Uh, I don't believe in making my players remember any more than like what's on their character sheet and what's in the rule book. Um, for me, it's about full immersion in the story that we are creating together, uh,
Mhm,
exploring the world that I'm unfolding for them. Uh, and so my game, it's really funny. My campaigns, when it comes to like what a Jeremy Crawford session looks like, has barely changed over the course of the game's editions. I pretty much have run D&D more or less the same way going all the way back to first edition. And it's been easy to do that because of my focus on storytelling and deep world immersion. As you know, Todd, and I think you know too, Adam, I almost always DM in my homebrew setting, which I started using toward the end of first edition, and I've been using it ever since. It feels like home. A few of my players now have been playing in that world for many years. Uh, my husband, who's one of my players, he is the setting's biggest fan, and we keep going back to that setting partly just because he wants to keep exploring different parts of the world. Uh, and that setting, I originally conceived of it as the world that Barovia originally came from, because Barovia in Ravenloft, it was taken away from some
yeah.
place and locked in the mists. And so when I was a kid, Ravenloft was by far my favorite adventure for D&D.
Mm.
It was really the adventure that showed me the amazing storytelling potential of D&D, and I loved it so much that I began wondering, well, where is Barovia from? Because it's never talked about as being from the Forgotten Realms or for
Oh
Greyhawk or
yeah.
from Dragonlance or from any of the other classic settings. And so I gave myself the task as a teenager. Well, I'm going to make the world that it came from, and I have been I have been DMing in that world for decades and decades now. Uh, and some people might not know that Chris Perkins, who again plays in my campaign, we made the decision while working on Curse of Strahd to start weaving some of my setting into Ravenloft. And so there are
Oh,
actually
cool.
references to my setting all over Curse of Strahd. We never dwell on them. They're always there as sort of little Easter eggs that we might do more with at a later time. But if you're ever reading through the book and you come across weird references to like the Ulmist Inquisition or the priests of Osibus, or those stone monoliths outside the Bone Grinder windmill, where it says there are these carvings of 4 cities associated with the 4 seasons. All of that is from my setting.
Oh
There
wow.
is a section when you go to Yester Hill about the mists themselves, and about some people calling the mists the Whispering Wall, and having a theory about what the mists actually are. That's directly from my setting. The revenants at Argenvolstholt, who can end up being your allies, who were once members of this noble knighthood. It is said that they come from the Holy Empire of Valentia. That's from my campaign setting. So that's what I mean. If you went through carefully with a fine tooth comb through Curse of Strahd, you'll see that we have actually situated it uh, as connected to this setting that I've been DMing in for most of my life.
Okay, really fast question though. Is there just a
Yep.
hole in the world where Barovia used to be in your setting?
My setting currently takes place 200 years after Curse of Strahd, and in the current point in the timeline, Barovia has actually come back, uh, and it is a great source of concern and mystery, partly because it came back, the place did, but none of the people did. Uh, so
Oh.
bef- so before that, yes, there was actually this wasteland where Barovia
Yeah.
used to be, but then there was this momentous event where suddenly it phased back, but there was no one in it. No animals
Ew.
either. It was just the place. And so slowly people have moved back in, but there are, as you can imagine,
Now,
Not me.
problems there.
I mean, rent's got to
I
be
would
cheap.
never move there.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
rent's super
Rent
cheap in old
rent is
Barovia.
super duper cheap. Yes.
So I don't know. Like I've
Yeah,
heard that like if everyone
come here.
once everyone and everything is dead in Ravenloft, Ravenloft will return to Jeremy's setting.
Yep.
That's what I got
Yep.
from that.
Yeah,
Well,
that is
so
Oh,
in my
that's
in
way
fascinating.
my
more upsetting.
in my current campaign, one of the things that they are grappling with is actually them finally discovering why Ravenloft was made in the first place and why Strahd
Oh,
was trapped. Because there is a cosmic purpose to the first vampire. And now we are at the point in the campaign where various groups are vying with each other. Some groups want Strahd to fulfill that purpose, and other groups are trying to stop him from fulfilling that purpose.
do you need
And
another player for this group? Just asking in
Jeremy,
front of thousands of
is this the
people.
setting that you use at conventions?
So I do use it at many conventions. I'm glad you asked that, because many people who've actually played at my tables at conventions have actually played in this setting. Now, sometimes at conventions, I will run whatever the latest Adventurers League adventures are. So in that case, I'm usually running a game in the Forgotten Realms, uh, and and then just having fun, riffing on whatever the adventure writer did. And Todd, you've played in one of my games
Yes.
where um, and I riff a lot. Like I can't
Yeah.
help it as a DM. If I'm running an adventure by somebody else, I will usually take the adventure as just a loose guideline that I will follow, and then I just run with whatever sort of tickles my funny bone at the time. Uh, but when I'm running an adventure of my own design at a convention, it is almost always in my home setting, and most of my convention games set in my setting are connected to each other. And so if someone were to have played in all of my convention games over the last, I've been doing this now, I think, for at least 5 years, they would realize that they were actually in a campaign of a sort. Even the game I ran this past summer at the castle in France, because there was this D&D in a castle event,
Yeah.
that three-day adventure that I ran was set in my home setting, uh, but it included characters who had been transported there from the Forgotten Realms, mixed in with some characters who were native to that place, and then also mixed in with two characters who came there from Barovia, the Barovia that's locked away in the mists. So there were these three groups of people coming from different times and places, meeting up in this world. And they realized at the end of that 3-day adventure that they saw the conspiracy that would eventually lead to the creation of the first vampire. Because again, as I mentioned, there is a great cosmic purpose to why vampires were made and why that vampire, Count Stradvan Zarovich in particular, was made. And so people have been able to see both the beginning of that story and also nearing the end of that great story.
Again,
And
if you need
Sign
another
me up.
player.
uh, the game I will be running at GameholeCon this year, it's called The Ashes of the Vampire, and that game is set in my setting. Todd, are you going to be at Gamehole?
Yes.
I
so
am too.
so my game. Oh, you are too, Adam. So
Yes, I
No,
am.
so
no.
my game. My game is sold out, but I might be able to squeeze you guys into. I'm running
Oh,
it
yeah.
twice. It's a four-hour game. I wouldn't be able to have both of you at the same table, but
Oh,
maybe
that's
one
fine.
of you at one of them and the other one at the other one. So
We'll
if you
make
guys
do.
want to join in, I'll have to ask the convention organizers if they'll let me be
At first,
naughty.
I just
and
envisioned
I'll
like a
talk to
smaller
Alex.
table.
We'll get it sorted out.
Like there's one small table for Adam. Like just,
well, I
it's
could
like
have.
so.
I could have the two of you at a little card table next to the table.
Yeah.
It'd be like the kids'
Nice.
Yeah, we're
table
like the
at
kids.
Like the
Thanksgiving.
kids' table, yeah. Hey, I'll take it.
This-
I'll take it. It sounds fun. All right.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Do we have some questions?
Speaking of vampires, I am a coffee vampire. I live on coffee, so that's what I'm drinking is not water. It is coffee.
This is sweet tea. So,
Okay.
I drink water. I actually drink water. Yeah.
It sounds like you are also DMing some type of game at TwitchCon.
Yes.
What kind of game is that going to be?
So the plan right now is for me to run an adventure set in Waterdeep, but it will be a custom adventure. I might use some of the material I did backstage at Stream of Many Eyes because there I was running a Waterdeep adventure backstage, but that was a longer
was fun.
adventure. So if the adventure I do at TwitchCon will have to be shorter than that. We'll see if I can resist whisking them away to my home setting because I've done that too. At some conventions, I've actually started them in another setting and then they end up in my setting. A year or two ago, I had an adventure start in Baldur's Gate, but that then ended up in my setting. They had to deal with something there and then they were transported back because my setting, like Ravenloft, has sort of misty connections to other D&D worlds.
And you've never live streamed this.
No, I
adventure?
have not.
Have
I
you
have
ever live
not.
streamed a D&D game?
I think the only one I've ever done was a number of years ago when I was at Lucca Comics and Games, the huge convention in Italy, and I DM'd a game that they streamed. But yeah, no. Otherwise, I have not been doing streamed games. People often ask me to stream my home game. Uh, I don't though, because for Perkins and Wyatt,
Yeah,
and we've had other people from the D&D team before in my game. It's our chance to just have a home game and just
yeah, just
enjoy
have fun.
D&D as D&D fans. And so for us, it's kind of important to keep that as like that's for us. As
Yeah,
much as I know people would love seeing it, it I think people would like to know that we are still at heart just big D&D goobs, and we want a chance to be at our table and just say now we're playing D&D, and
yeah,
get to enjoy it the way everyone else gets to enjoy it.
yeah. That's
That
fair.
makes me feel really good about just the state of the game and who is designing it, though, to be honest.
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah, yeah.
we have to do that around our office as well. So we've got probably 50 people in the building. And of course, they're not all working on D&D Beyond. But with all of those people, I'm pretty sure the last count that I did, informal count, I'm not polling people, but I'm pretty sure there are at least 35 people that play Dungeons and Dragons now. And a couple of years
Excellent.
ago, before we started this whole thing, it was, more like five. And so
Mhm.
people are just flocking to play the game. There are games going on every day virtually, and we are doing the same thing. We want that to be something that's a little more personal, that is just this outlet for us to express and engage in the fandom that we have for this great game. And so I think it is really important from like a recharging the batteries perspective, to
Mhm.
make sure that we make time for that.
Yeah. And another aspect of my home game is, not only do we not stream it because we want to, basically have just a true home experience, but I also do not allow us to use any material that is currently under development at work. Uh, in my game, we only use material that is in our published books. And I have that. So I think that's the closest I come to a house rule, that we will only use material that's currently finished. Because remember, we're working on D&D material years in advance. Like I'm already
Yeah,
tinkering with stuff that's going to come out next year. None of that material do I allow in my home game because I want us to experience D&D the way other fans experience D&D. So in my home game,
yeah.
I want us, because I never want to lose touch with what it's like to just be a regular fan of the game and to experience the game the way everyone else experiences it. And I don't want us to have some super tricked out version that I'm playing at home that bears no resemblance to what everyone else is playing. The D&D I play at my dining room table is the same D&D everyone else is playing, with the player's handbook and the dungeon master's guide and the monster manual.
It would be really hard to like not turn your brain off too. I would imagine, like if you're using stuff that has not been released or something you're working on, to look at it as
Right.
playtest material and to be kind of like
Hmm.
quantifying it and wondering if this is broken or if this is working really well, and that takes you kind of
Yeah.
out. That takes you out of a safe place in terms of just
Yes.
having fun.
And
Yeah,
when I'm DMing, especially my home game, the last thing I want to be doing is worrying about, did we write this rule well? Because I've got a funny voice to come up with. I mean, come on, I have hags to role play.
Priorities. I love it.
yes,
Yes.
and you are
I have
very,
that.
very, very good at it.
I
Oh,
heard
thank you.
somebody was telling me that you did a little bit of a Jarlaxle impression or something that they heard. I could have swore that was you anyway. May I
Ah.
don't know. Maybe it was Perkins, but I thought
Oh,
it was you.
so Perkins did Jarlaxle in the latest Acquisitions Inc. game at PAX. Now, Jarlaxle did appear briefly in the game I did backstage at Stream of Many Eyes, but that game was much more focused on Kuotoa with ridiculous voices, uh, me doing my best impression I could do of, it was a guy from He-Man, actually. I can't remember his name, but it was a fish guy in He-Man who had this bubbly
Oh my
voice,
god.
Yes.
and that's the voice I was using for my Kuotoa in that Stream of Many Eyes game.
Oh,
That is outstanding.
that's so
And
Jeremy,
and
fantastic.
we've got
usually,
about 5 minutes left. I wanted to ask one more thing and possibly give you a chance to explain some of the intent. We've seen a couple of surveys that have come out, in the last month or so. One came out, I think, about a month ago, and then we've got another one that is out right now that closes on the 14th, so sometime next week, I think.
Mhm.
So, can you walk us through, in the time we have left here, a high level of what these surveys are doing for the Dungeons and Dragons team and what their intent is?
So, fifth edition, we built on a foundation that is composed of many things, but one of those things is feedback from the community. And that's not only how we built the game, but it's also how we maintain the game. And so it's important for us periodically to check in with the community, take the community's temperature to make sure we're still on the right track. Uh, the last time we did a set of big surveys like this, the survey results we got helped inform many of the design decisions we made for Zenithar's Guide to Everything. Uh, and survey results have helped us also, since the last big survey, make some decisions about things we put into Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, into Volo's Guide to Monsters. So these surveys truly help set the course for the game going forward. Uh, Now, we don't take people's responses and just say, well, that's what we're going to do. We analyze it. We have to balance what one part of the community wants versus what another part of the community wants, always with the aim of pleasing as many people as we can. And so, speculation that this survey is, maybe planting the seeds for the next edition, that speculation is premature. Um, Partly because, keep in mind about how open we were about D&D Next leading into 5th edition. You can be pretty darn sure if we are revving up seriously for a new edition, we would be talking about it. It would be a big deal. No, we're taking surveys right now because we have a bunch of cool projects in the works, and we want to make sure we're on the right course. Because even sometimes when we say, all right, we're going to do these 5 books in the next few years, or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, we actually are planning many years in advance. uh, we still have a lot of questions about the particulars in those books, and the surveys, especially if we have a dilemma like, well, we have time to do one of these two things, which of these two should we do? We can go to survey data to help us make our decision, because if we look at the survey data and see, all right, people have shown that in general they're leaning more toward option A than toward option B, so we're going to go with option A. We still might do option B, but option B might get pushed further into the future. So really, the surveys help us in many ways to set priorities for our design, because all of our design takes time, and time means money. Um,
Mm.
uh, but as fans, our goal is to get to as much of it as we can, as long as we have the privilege of working on the game. And again, really, the surveys just help us put things in their order.
So you mentioned forward looking a little bit, but I have seen that you've mentioned on Twitter some new errata that might be
Yes.
coming out for the core rule books.
Mhm.
Has any of that survey data, not necessarily these, but any of the survey data from earlier, is that going to influence any of that we might see? And can you tell us a little bit about what to expect there?
So the errata process is really a separate track. When it comes to errata, our goal is to support the game we published, not to start putting new design into the game as it already exists. So survey data really helps inform our new design. It does not affect what we do with our old design. Any errata that we do is based on not only our play experience of the game, but the play experience of the hundreds of thousands of people who play D&D, as we get that feedback and we see, oh, this thing in the core books isn't as clear as it could be, or this thing is incomplete, or whoops, we forgot to include this important thing, we'd better now include it. So the upcoming errata is more of the types of things you've seen in the past errata, where we clarify some things. There are a few things that have been kind of long-standing questionable bits in the core books that we have finally addressed. For instance, the contagion spell for a long time has generated questions, and it has gone on long enough that it's become clear that it really does need to be fixed, and so we fixed it. We have not. It's not a brand new design. It's just we've made the design now function the way it's intended to function. It is going to function a little differently from how some people have played it, because, and this is one of the reasons why we've taken our time in changing it, because we are extremely cautious about changing how anything works in the core books, because people have to remember that even if there's something that you might be dissatisfied about, that thing you're dissatisfied with might be someone else's favorite thing. And the last thing I
Yeah.
want to do when changing something is taking away something from somebody else that they really like. It's one of the reasons, for instance, that we haven't, people, I get asked sometimes, oh, hey, you guys released an alternative version of the Ranger. Are you going to overwrite the version in the player's handbook with that version? Well, no, because many people love the version in the player's handbook. So we're taking, again, a very uh, measured approach so that we can please as many people as possible. Now, speaking of the Ranger,
Jeremy, I am so sorry. Jeremy, I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to cut it off. We're 1 minute.
And I was about
That's
to
a
tell you,
cliffhanger, man.
I was about to tell
Speaking
you
of
one
the
of the
Ranger.
Ranger changes. Because the Ranger does get a couple of changes, but I can't tell you now.
I'm going to get in so much trouble.
What?
I'm sure people are going to hit you with so many tweets coming up here.
We can't go long. We can't go long.
We're going to have to wrap up, or they're going to get so mad at me on the D&D team. I apologize, folks, but you can find the Sage, Mr. Jeremy Crawford, on Twitter. Hit him up. Who knows if he'll spill the beans or not. Either way,
all right, Jeremy, we'll do
see.
an interview.
Only on this show was I going to spill it.
Everybody hates me now, but I love you all. Thank you so much for joining today. Thanks, Jeremy, for joining us. Really appreciate it. Join us next week with Marisha Ray. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for having me.